Welcome to Loop TV. I'm your host, Gene Munster, along with Eric and Greg Levesque today. They are founders of Strider. Most of you have never heard of Strider. If you work in any sort of information tech-related business, you will likely hear a lot about the company in the next decade. It is a pleasure to have you both here. And I want to kick it off. By the way, you are not seeing double. This is not some Zoom trick here. I'm sure they hear that joke all the time. You did guess it. That's right. Not only are they founders, co-founders, they are twins, and it's been really exciting. I've met the company a few years ago. Exciting to see how you guys are progressing. And the topic today with Strider is really the future of how to protect innovation inside a company. And not only that, but the security pieces that can stem from that as we are in a digital world. And I think this topic became reared its head. One example was last December with the SolarWinds data breach. As a reminder, is that there were about a dozen segments of the government that were compromised through SolarWinds. It was as if a land and expand. It was likely an inside job as well. And so just want to use that as an example of kind of how security or how the threats have evolved and bring you in. We'll start with Eric here. When you saw back a month ago, when you heard about SolarWinds, what did you think of?
Well, first off, the fact that the infiltration took place, many months in advance of the identification of the infiltration shows that there's a level of sophistication that is advancing at a rate that's more and more difficult for network security professionals and the existing tools that are being used to identify malware and infiltration.
Okay, so all this was going on for a long time before anyone flagged it.
Yeah, they were in for months, as far as we know today. The other aspect of that is there's this overarching theme here that we're seeing on the rise, and that is geopolitical competition. The term that's being used is great power competition, and the focus of foreign adversaries, i.e., China, Russia, Iran, and others, to use all means at their disposal, from cyber to economic to disinformation campaigns, in order to achieve their national strategic objectives.
Okay, I mean, this episode just got a lot bigger than I thought here, but let's break that down and just talk about the cyber piece of that as well. And when we talk about these governments kind of at play against each other, we're talking about talent that gets hired that could be working for a foreign government, correct?
100%. Yeah. And really where I'm going with that, Gene, is if you think about all the different tools that can be used to achieve an objective by a nation state, as that plays out in the private sector, which we're seeing at Strider more and more, where companies are being targeted for their innovation and for their talent in order to help a foreign country achieve its economic goals.
Okay, let me pause there and just make sure I fully understand that is XYZ country looks at a US based company and says, I really like how they're innovating around some wireless technology. I mean, you pick the theme. And then what's the next step that that foreign government would do?
Well, the next step could be pretty broad in reality. I mean, what we're seeing, Gene, is an effort by foreign countries to position themselves as leaders in emerging technology.
Okay.
That will allow for economic growth, that allows for political stability, that allows for military modernization. So it's multifaceted. And today, the majority of innovation that goes on in the United States is in the private sector. So the private sector is front and center target for foreign nations. They're on the front lines today in this battle of great power competition.
Got it. Makes a ton of sense. And so they identify what these technologies that they want to, these innovations that they want to get their hands on. And then do they send a bunch of hackers? Do they get a bunch of geeks and get them a bunch of Mountain Dew or whatever the equivalent of that is in these other countries and have them start hacking code and do some engineering, social engineering around getting people to click on a link? What's the method of getting inside?
So yeah, Gene, we've seen a lot of different tactics used. So cyber is definitely one, but in essence, it's whatever tool in the toolkit that they have that they need in order to get at their target, they'll use. So if cyber hacking doesn't work, then they'll use social engineering. If that isn't effective, then they'll actually potentially recruit somebody inside the company, or they'll plant somebody inside the company. We've
Okay.
also seen cases where, foreign agents were sent to places like Boston to then gain access into a company's office and try to actually set up a, hard connection into their network.
Okay.
Uh,
Pretty
So
intense here. And so
yeah,
you have this multiple fronts. Makes a lot of sense that part of the future of conflict is going to be around tech and around getting a hold of these innovations. It makes sense that the approach from governments alike are going to be a multifaceted approach. But if we're going to zero in on that kind of the human approach, at least the humans, people, employees working, to me, that is the most disturbing company that would be innovating. I would think that would be the most disturbing, most concerning part because of the amount of damage that can be done. And I think that is, again, what probably happened at SolarWinds. But would you agree with that? Is that the human piece? This isn't about putting a better firewall in place or getting better antivirus software. This is about trying to figure out who is in your organization.
absolutely. And really what it comes down to is companies in particular have been very focused on protecting and hardening their internal networks, right? And cybersecurity, right? But really your adversary approaches it with a blended operations model. And so what we're seeing is there are some massive gaps in companies' defensive posture where they're inherently reactive. And to your point, Gene, the insider problem is one of those areas that is not getting enough resources and attention. And we're seeing DOJ indictments and news headlines, it seems like every other week about an insider in a company or at a research institution who was ultimately, working for a foreign government or providing information to a foreign government that is causing severe damage to not only these organizations' reputation, but also bottom line, right?
And
Loss of
Greg, you said it happens weekly or monthly. Are there some specific examples you can give us?
Sure. So there's been a number of cases here in the press recently. Harvard University had a professor, Charles Lieber, head of the chemistry department, who was recently indicted. He was part of the Chinese government's Thousand Talents program. There's also been cases in the private sector as well.
Wait, it's what was the program? 1,000 talents?
Yeah, the Thousand Talents program. This is the premier Chinese government overseas talent recruitment program that they use to essentially recruit and incentivize overseas experts. These are true domain experts. They have unique technical areas of expertise to either come back to China or to stay in place in the organization they're working at, but ultimately to support a domestic science and technology program.
Makes
Right.
sense. I interrupted you too, Greg. Is there any other quick examples you can think of?
Sure. Tesla is another example, right? And this is publicly out there in the news. They had an engineer who stole, files related to their autopilot program. You can go down the list. Eastman Chemical Company had an incident as well, a year or two ago. Insider employee trying to get into a talent program and offering up company IP in order to get recruited and inducted into that. Yeah, you can start to see like the incentives here are really interesting, right? Where employees and companies are being given money, they're being given accolades in order to divulge company secrets or information or IP.
That's intense. And so what are companies typically doing? They have some software. Do they put like measures in place where you need to have two people turn the key at the same time when data is released? And what are they currently doing today? This is the ones that are not using Strider. What are they doing?
Yeah. So good question. What we've seen across the board, whether it's a Fortune 500 company or we'll call it a mid-market company, they're inherently focused on internal data and internal activity. Okay, so the lens that they're viewing this type of risks through is primarily internal anomalistic behavior on network.
Got
Uh,
it. And a
what
machine can monitor that, correct?
machines are picking up somebody accessing a file that they shouldn't or attempting to, logging into the network at strange hours of the day, things like that raise flags that then the network security team or internal security team can go and run down. It's inherently reactive and there's a lot of false positives.
Hmm.
What we are focused on doing, what we deliver to customers is the ability for them to start becoming proactive by, as Greg says here, this is really a system. Talent programs, these incentive structures, the targeting of talent and the targeting of IP is done globally and it's done systematically by nations. And so what we do is we provide insight through data around how does that system work and what are the threat vectors that are most likely targeting your company. And we identify existing risks, we identify historical risks, and we also provide, as I mentioned, that footprint so that companies can start to look from the internal point of view to the external point of view of where are those threats coming from and how do I develop a long-term risk mitigation strategy to secure my IP, protect my people, and over the long run, maintain my competitive edge in an ever-growing, more competitive environment.
All that sounds great, Eric, and I don't know how much you can share on Loop TV, but how do you actually do some of those things?
So our approach is at our core, Gene, we're a data company. So we are delivering very granular, unique data sets to our customers. It's delivered through a SaaS platform. It's contextualized, it's actionable data. It's actually looking at where does my corporate ecosystem line up with this nation state driven targeting ecosystem. And we're able to
Wait, can you say that again, Eric? Where does my corporate
so where
ecosystem
does my
line up with
corporate
a
ecosystem? Yep. So I have in my corporate ecosystem, I have personnel, I have my supply chain and core vendor relationships, I have joint ventures.
so yeah, it's
Oh,
not just the internal employees, it goes well beyond that.
it goes well beyond that. We're looking at the holistic view of a company and their competitive advantage. And we can marry that up with what we call an economic statecraft system, which Greg has some deep expertise in this domain, previously working with the U.S. government in understanding how do nations like China, like Russia, and others utilize the commercial domain to, like I said before, achieve their national objectives, right? And it's done systematically through talent programs, through funding schemes, through invited lectures, and in some cases too, Gene, we've even seen where they'll target supply chains through what appear to be very commercial acquisitions, but have a strategic objective to them, and it's access, right? So we're able to collect data at scale, contextualize it, and deliver it to our customers so they can actually visualize that activity within their corporate ecosystem.
And would Strider potentially give the data and the insight from the company side be, we probably shouldn't be doing business with this vendor, or maybe there's a group of employees that probably shouldn't be here? Could they draw that level of an insight?
Yeah, so they certainly could draw that level of an insight, and each company has their own different thresholds for risk mitigation. So we don't fundamentally tell companies what they should do, but they have now the context understanding in order to make those judgments, right? And like Eric said, everything is evidence-based. So the data we deliver, it's not probabilistic. There's actual evidentiary material.
Got it. What's the reaction with your customers when you start to show them this?
I mean, fact of the matter is, let's just take a step back here. A couple of years ago, the U.S. Trade Representative's Office came out with a figure, Chinese IP theft in the U.S. and how much that costs the U.S. economy on an annual basis. They pegged it at $600 billion a year, an economic loss to the United States.
600 billion, okay.
You don't get a number like that, Gene, without having a systematic approach to talent targeting and recruiting talent and IP theft. And so fundamentally, most companies that we've engaged with across the Fortune 500, they've dealt with these types of problems in the past, right? They've had incidences occur, and almost all of them are currently investigating incidences as well.
Got it. So will you guys come in also retroactively too, or is it usually proactively to try to set up the guardrails?
So predominantly right now, it's providing them with an immediate perspective of their risk landscape.
Got it.
Enabling them, like Eric said, to become proactive, right? And here's the cool thing, Gene, we're able to do this without touching a company's network or getting any data from them.
That's amazing.
Yep.
Well, I think when you put this together, I think final question, we'll give it to you, Eric, is when fast forward 5 years from now, what's the conversation going to be like around this topic?
Well, what we're seeing is that there's a growing awareness of this type of threat, this blended operation approach to IP targeting and talent recruitment. I believe that we're seeing a fundamental shift in corporate security And then ultimately, within the theme of great power competition, there's this growing recognition that the private sector has to be part of the solution. So if the United States is going to be able to continue to compete in the same manner that it has been, the private sector needs to be able to be a partner with the public sector in addressing these threats from nation states. And so I think in 5 years, what we're going to see is that this is going to be a must have for corporate security teams. There's going to be a recognition that they need to have a better understanding and tools that are at their disposal to better protect their people from recruitment
Hmm.
and also better protect their innovation from being utilized by foreign nations to advance their military or the competitive edge of their domestic national champions.
I mean, it's just two big takeaways from my end is just that concept about how countries are going to be competing in the future. And I think that the urgency around that is more clear to me today. And this theme too about having a more holistic view of being proactive, we're obviously going to hear more about it. I think there is very low probability that this problem solves itself. And I can tell you, you guys are in a great spot. Loop is not an investor. We're not an investor in Strider. I wish we were. We're not. Oftentimes when these outbreaks happen, like a SolarWinds, people will ask me which companies should I invest in, and I was hoping to say you got to invest in Strider even though you're private today. I'm thrilled that we got a chance to talk a little bit about what you're doing, and undoubtedly going to be successful. Two of the, I think, most measured people that I've ever come across in meeting a lot of companies over the years. And I know you guys are going to do successful, and thank you for what you're doing too, just making innovation more secure. So on behalf of Eric and Greg and my greater awareness of how the world operates, that's Loop TV for now, and bye for now.